When you work in Excel, it's easy to make changes to the data. When you, for example, have a table like this one over here, and you want to change a value or add a value, you just double click on the cell value, enter the value, and that's it. However, that doesn't work in Power BI because Power BI only reads from the data source. You cannot write back to the data source. However, there are of course workarounds, and one of them is to use Power Apps to write back to the data source. And that is what I'm going to show you in this video. Welcome to How to Power BI. My name is Bas, and if this is the very first time for you visiting this channel, then make sure to hit that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date on all of my videos in which I share everything I know about Power BI. Now let's have a look at the table visual that I built over here, where we have the client ID, client name, subscription status, and cancellation reason. And what I want to be able to do is to change the status and the reason. And at the moment, well, I cannot do that. I cannot just double click on a cell and add it or change the value. However, with a little workaround using Power Apps, you can. Now the Power Apps visual you also find over here in the visualization section. Just add it to your report. And now you have to add the fields that you're going to use for this app. So let's go here to my clients table. And here I want to have all 4 of these fields. And now we can either choose an app or create a new one. Now, we did not build our app yet, so let's create a new one. And now you get this enormous URL. Just click on OK, and it opens up your browser. So now we are in Power Apps, and we're going to build an application that lets us write back data to the data source. Now, here on the left-hand side, you see all of the different screens that we are going to build for this application and the objects that we place on these different screens. And you see that automatically it already added here a first screen with a gallery that contains different items. Now, what is also important is that we have here Power BI integration. So there's a special connection between your report and this app. And we can only use those fields that we added in our Power BI report to this Power App visual. Now let's make a simple change. I'm going to select one of the items, and there you see we have this item and what I want to show, the cancellation reason. Well, this was chosen automatically, but we don't have cancellation reasons just yet, only the task one over here at the bottom. So I'm going to change this to, let's say, the client ID. So now we have all of the client IDs, but we cannot do much with it just yet. However, I want to see if it already interacts with that normal table visual in my Power BI report. Now, to check this, I'm going to go here to File, and then I'm going to click on Save As, and we're going to save it to the cloud. And of course, we can give it a name, so we can call it Write Comment. And that app that we're going to create, we can also say who we want to share it with. All right, so now let's go back to the Power BI report. So now we just want to check if that table visual interacts with the Power App visual. Now the next thing that I want to do is to show a form on that Power App visual that lets me change the selected entry here in the table. Now here in Power Apps, I'm going to delete that gallery that was just showing all of the client information. So that's not what I want, so I'm going to delete that. And what I do want is a form that lets me change the selected entry. So I go to Insert, and then we can go here to Forms and click on Edit. So now we have to add a data source to the form. So the data source we want to write back to. So we have to click there on Connect to Data, Add Data, and then here we can go to Connectors and then choose the type of data source that you want to write back to. Now, in my case, I'm going to first use a normal Excel file that I saved on OneDrive. And you see we have there OneDrive for Business. Let's choose that one. And then you can select, for example, your Excel file, choose the table that you want to use as the source, and click on Connect. So now you added it as a data source for this app. And if you want to use it then for this form, you still have to go here on the right-hand side, Data Source, and choose it from there. Okay, so now we can add the fields that we want to use for this form. So let's click here on Edit Fields, then Add Field. And now you can click on all of the fields that you want to use. And then we can collapse them and put them in the order we like to have them. Okay, so first the client ID, client name, subscription status, and cancellation reason. Now let's resize this form and let's create a little bit of space there at the top. Here I want to have a header, so let's go to Insert. I want to add a label, and let's change the text of this label. Let's say add a comment, just like this. Also here under properties on the right hand side, we can change the color, for example, of the background. We can have, let's say, blue, and let's say we want to have a white font. Then we can also put it in the middle and resize it over here at the top. And maybe we want to have it in bold. So now we have the header. The next thing that we want to do is to make sure that the form shows the information for the selected item in the other table visual in Power BI. Now, how can we do that? Well, this doesn't happen automatically. We have to set it up. And the way to do it is by going here, first of all, to the tree view, and then select the form. Then here we have a drop down from which we can make our selection of what we want to change. Now, here we want to go to item because we want to change the text these items show, and we can do that with a formula. So now we can use a function called lookup. So over here we have the lookup function, and the source in which we want to look up a value is going to be that client table. So let's refer to dim client, and now the condition that finds the row, the value that we want to return. So this is going to be based on the client ID. So I take the client ID from that client table, and this needs to be equal to, well, the selected value in the table visual inside of Power BI. But how can we know what that is? So now we can use another function, which is called first, which returns the first row of the source. And now we need to refer back to that Power BI integration, that data that we added to the Power App visual. So we can just type in Power BI integration, so integration.data. And then we can close that bracket, add another dot, and then from that row we want to have, well, we want to have the client ID over there. And it can be that it still gives you a warning, like in my case, well, I have an issue with my data types, probably I have to fix that, or I can just go over here and say that the first one needs to be an integer. That will also fix it. So now we have a form that will show the selected row in the table visual inside of Power BI. Now let's see if that works. So I'm going to go again to File, going to save it, and important, you have to click again on Publish. So it usually takes a few seconds for it updates. Just add another page, go back and forth, and then it reloads that Power App visual, and after a few seconds, you see it's there. All right, now at the moment it shows client ID, well, 1001 with all of the information. Well, I have nothing selected, but I said, give me the first one. All right, so that makes sense. So if I select the second one, now you see, it shows me the information of the second client or the third one. So that is working. However, what still is missing is that when I would change a value, for example, I would put in a cancellation reason. Well, how do I click on OK? There's no button yet. I forgot about the button. So let's go back again. And you can simply add a button here on the insert, then add a button. And let's put it here at the bottom, and then also let's change the color to the same color blue so that it nicely matches. Maybe you also want to have a different text, then let's go here for OK. And when you now press that button, nothing happens. Okay, so here on select equals false, doesn't do anything. So what do we want to do? We want to submit the form. So let's click on here, the function submit form. Which form? Just look over here how it's called. I didn't rename it. You probably should, but I didn't. And I can refer back to form 1. Another thing that I would do is to set up what needs to happen when the information successfully rolled back to the data source. Now, just make sure that you select the form, then you go to the drop down, and we can say what needs to happen on success. So at the moment it's set to false. However, if you want to reflect the changes straight away, then one thing that needs to happen is to refresh the visuals. And you can do that by saying Power BI, integration.refresh, close the brackets. Now this is not refreshing the data source, which we will talk about in a second. This just refreshes the Power BI visuals. Okay, so that's one. Another thing that I would add over here is a message to the user that it was successful. So we can say notify, and then we can say success. And then we can say what kind of notification type we want. So notification type success. And then over here, the speed, and close the brackets. So with that semicolon over there, we can basically add multiple commands that need to happen when the form successfully submits. So that looks good. Now let's save it again and go back to Power BI. So here we are back in Power BI. I refreshed the visual. So here we have the button. And now I'm going to select, let's say, the second client. You see it nicely updates. Then we fill in the cancellation reason. So this is going to be test 2. I'm going to click here on OK. I see a nice message pops up. Success. I can click it away. And now I look at my table visual. Nothing happened. Why not? Now it's important what you're using as a source. Now, I wrote back to that Excel file that's on the OneDrive, and we are currently in import mode, not direct query, so the change doesn't automatically get reflected. I still need to refresh that table, which is not ideal. So later on, I will switch to a source that can use direct query instead of an Excel file on a OneDrive. All right. However, now let's see what happens when I now click on refresh data. Boom, there you go. We have test 2 over there in the cancellation reason column. It works. However, you probably don't want to click on refresh. You want to see it straight away. Now, what are your options when you do use Excel on a OneDrive as your source or a SharePoint list, something that cannot use direct query? Well, then we can trigger the refresh. Now, to trigger the refresh, we can do it in 2 ways. Now let's go back to Power Apps. Now the first option is to select the button, and then over here we can go to action, and then we can go to Power Automate. Here we can click on create a new flow. We will go now to Power Automate. Then here on the templates we can go for Power Apps buttons. We can also go here to create, and then here an instant cloud flow. And then we want to use Power Apps and click on create. Now here we trigger the action from Power Apps. And what needs to happen? Well, this is going to be the next step. Here we want to refresh a data set inside of Power BI. So over here we can go for Power BI and then refresh. Now here we have to choose the workspace and the data set. However, I didn't publish my report yet, so let me do that quickly. I go back to Power BI. Then over here, let's click on publish. Then choose the workspace you want to publish it to and click on select. So now that's published, I go to the workspace where I published it to. Then we can also select the data set. So over here, I choose the data set, click on save. So now I'm back in Power App. I have the button selected, went here to action, and here we have the available flows. Now the flow that we just created should show up, and the one that I previously set up. Now I'm going to choose over here this one. Then you just have to close that bracket so that it runs, and that's it. Now the advantage of this option is that you can make further adjustments to that flow. So if you want other stuff to happen automatically, that's possible. However, you don't necessarily need to use it. There's also an alternative where you don't need flow. You can just do it from within Power Apps, which you can do as follows. First of all, you have to go here to your data sources. Then here we can add a data source. Let's look for Power BI and then connect to your environment. And then I go back to the tree view, I select my form, and then here we want to go again on success, because there we can say do not only refresh the visuals, the Power BI integrations refresh, but here we also want to refresh a certain data set that we published to Power BI service. So let's set this up. I'm going to go to the formula bar, and here we want to say Power BI.refresh. So refresh dataset. There it is. Now here we have to say, give the group ID and the dataset ID in between quotes like this. Now if you don't know where to find them, just go to Power BI Service, go to the workspace, then select the dataset. Then in the URL, the part that's in between the forward slashes that follows after groups, that's the group ID. And then we have the dataset ID in the part after datasets. All right, just copy that over. And then again, we can save it and go back to Power BI. And you're probably thinking, well, it doesn't really make much sense to run a refresh every time you make a change. And that's true, because you are limited to only 8 refreshes if you have a Pro license. So if you want to make more than 8 changes, well, that's not possible. So therefore, it's probably much better if you use a source that can be used with direct query. Now, what could that source then be? Well, for example, SQL Server or Dataverse. Now, how would the experience then be if we have a source data that can be used with direct query? Well, here I have an example. So if I select, let's say, the second client, then over here we have our form. I put in the cancellation reason. So over here, test 2, click on OK. says it's successful, and also automatically refreshes that table visual that I have over there. So you see, it's instantly updating the visual and the source data. And you're probably thinking, would the setup be much different or much more complex? No, not at all. You follow the same steps, it's just you choose a different data source where we chose OneDrive before. So, and of course, here the tables themselves need to be in storage mode direct query. Now, another thing that should be addressed is, where do we put that form? Are you going to just have it on your page, always visible? Well, that's an option, but maybe you don't want that. Well, what other options are there? Well, the first thing that I was thinking of is maybe a tooltip, because then it doesn't take any space and you just hover over the line item that you want to change and go to the tooltip, change it there. So you could create a custom tooltip with that Power App form and then use it over here for your table. Now, the whole setup I'm not going to cover in this video, that's not the main focus. However, once it's set up, you just go to the line item that you want to change, and then you go to the tooltip, but the tooltip also moves, so it's not really a good solution. Now, it would be really nice if Power BI just adds this functionality that you can go to the tooltip and make changes. Would be very nice. However, there's a little bug. If you're really quick, then sometimes you actually do manage. So it probably takes you a little bit, but you see, now it worked for a bit, and then it disappeared. However, let me try again, and again, and again. You see, after a minute or so, then you probably manage one time to actually go to the tooltip and make any changes. All right, so that's kind of nice to know, but it's not really functional. All right, then another option that you have is to work with drill through. So you could also create a separate page, put your form on that page, then set up the drill through on, let's say, the client ID, and then you go to the line item for the visual that you want to change, drill through page. So you go to that form and then you make your changes and go back. So that would be an actual solution that could work. The solution that I like the most is to overlap the table with the Power App visual and then use bookmarks to either show one or the other, which then can link to a button right next to it so that you can click on it and it shows the form. And if you click on it again, it shows the table. So this is how you can use Power Apps to write back data to your data source. Now, I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions, just post them in the comment section below. I want to thank you for watching. And if you got some value out of this video, then consider subscribing. I hope to see you in the next video.